The Redstone saga begins not in the boardroom but at the drive-in. Born in 1923 as Sumner Rothstein, the man who would become Sumner Redstone was the son of a Boston-based theater operator, Michael Rothstein. In a symbolic gesture, the family anglicized their name to Redstone, foreshadowing Sumner's appetite for reinvention and power. After graduating from Harvard and briefly practicing law, Sumner joined his father's theater company, Northeast Theater Corporation, in the 1950s. What followed was one of the most audacious acts of empire building in modern American business history. Sumner Redstone saw where the world was going before most of his peers. He understood early that content was king, and that controlling both distribution and production could be an unbeatable combination. With a flair for leveraged acquisitions and an iron grip on decision-making, he transformed the family's modest drive-in chain into National Amusements, and from there into a global media titan. By acquiring Viacom, CBS, Paramount, Blockbuster, and BET, Redstone built a vertically integrated entertainment empire that at its peak rivaled Disney in scope and influence. He was brash, brilliant, and deeply controlling, a man whose business success was matched only by the drama of his family life and the chaos that came when succession was no longer theoretical. This was not just a family business, it was a family kingdom, and Sumner Redstone was its king, for better, and eventually for worse. At the heart of the Redstone empire was a deceptively simple structure: dual-class shares held through a private family company, National Amusements Incorporated, NAI. On paper, this small firm controlled the voting rights for two massive public companies, CBS and Viacom, despite owning only a fraction of their economic value. It was a masterstroke of modern dynastic control, 80% of the vote with less than 10% of the equity. But what looked like genius during Sumner Redstone's prime would later prove to be a brittle framework. This structure worked as long as one man held all the strings. But when Redstone's health declined and questions about his mental capacity arose, the empire's governance model turned inward and chaotic. The Sumner Redstone Trust, meant to ensure continuity, became a battlefield. Sherry Redstone, Sumner's daughter and heir apparent, clashed with longtime lieutenants like Philippe Dauman and George Abrams, both of whom were removed from their trustee roles in a blaze of litigation. The legal firestorm exposed the flaw in Redstone's obsession with control, no plan for sharing it. Unlike more thoughtful dynastic families who separate ownership from governance, the Redstones had fused the two. And as Sumner became less capable of acting as referee, the game continued, just without rules, without trust, and increasingly, without dignity. In theory, the Redstones had locked in family control for generations. In reality, they had built a governance time bomb. In the Redstone saga, succession wasn't just mismanaged, it was actively resisted. Sumner Redstone, even well into his 90s, clung to power with the same tenacity he'd shown in boardroom battles decades earlier. He had no interest in handing over the reins, not to professional managers and certainly not to his daughter, Sherry Redstone. Despite Sherry's decades of involvement, Sumner dismissed her publicly and even offered her a $1 billion buyout to walk away from her stake in National Amusements. Her refusal set the stage for a long and bitter transition, with the company effectively leaderless at the top but still fully under Redstone family control. When Sherry eventually began asserting herself, it wasn't through a planned succession. It was through survival of the fittest. She outmaneuvered Dauman in court, took control of the trust, and worked to reunite CBS and Viacom after their split. But her rise wasn't a coronation. It was a hostile takeover of a family legacy, one that left deep fractures in the boardroom and headlines for the tabloids. Instead of grooming a successor, Sumner built walls around his authority. Instead of a plan, there was improvisation. And in the end, what could have been a carefully orchestrated transfer of leadership became a very public, very expensive fight that played out over years and across multiple courtrooms. It wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a case study in how ego, avoidance, and lack of preparation can erode even the most formidable dynasties from within. At the heart of the Redstone family drama was a governance structure that looked bulletproof on paper, but functioned more like a powder keg in practice. Through National Amusements Incorporated, the Redstone family controlled nearly 80% of the voting shares in both CBS and Viacom, despite owning only a small fraction of the companies economically. This dual-class structure gave them tremendous leverage, but with that power came a critical flaw. No built-in mechanisms for conflict resolution when the controller was no longer capable of clear decision-making. When Sumner's health declined, his trust, which required confirmation from 3 doctors to determine incapacity, effectively paralyzed governance. No one could make a move without sparking litigation. Sherry Redstone was locked in battles not only with board members like Felipe Doman, but also with Sumner's own estate planning documents, which included bizarre provisions like burial plots for ex-girlfriends. Rather than protect the business, the family structures created gridlock. The trust was supposed to maintain continuity. It became a battleground. The entire system lacked one crucial element: a plan for what would happen when Sumner no longer could lead. As public trust in the companies fell, investors were whiplashed by sudden firings, lawsuits, and M&A speculation. And still the family held the reins long after the driver had lost control. By the late 2010s, the Redstone media empire was no longer just battling industry disruption, it was battling itself. Sherry Redstone, once dismissed by her father, seized control amid a power vacuum, but her reign was immediately tested. Legal battles exploded. Philippe Doman sued over his ousting from the trust. CBS's board, led by Les Moonves, sued to dilute the family's voting control. Headlines blurred the line between HBO's Succession and real life. These weren't quiet boardroom disagreements. They were full-scale legal offensives that aired the family's dysfunction to the world. The courtroom became the new boardroom. Under the pressure of public scrutiny and operational drift, CBS and Viacom finally re-merged in 2019, a decade after their split. It was a move to consolidate, stabilize, and reorient, but it couldn't reverse the erosion of value. While Disney and Netflix soared into the streaming era, Viacom CBS, now Paramount Global, stumbled, burdened by years of internal distraction. The final blow? In 2024, Sherry Redstone agreed to sell National Amusements, the family's crown jewel of control, to David Ellison's Skydance Media. After nearly a century of family dominance, the Redstones were out. It wasn't a fall from grace, it was a slow-motion collapse, accelerated by denial, delayed succession, and the refusal to let go. The Redstone saga is now taught not for its triumphs, but for its failures in governance, textbook examples of how not to steward a family empire. Dual-class share structures allowed the Redstones to control CBS and Viacom, with less than a 10% economic stake, amplifying power but also risk. When family dynamics turned toxic, minority shareholders were trapped under a structure built for permanence but not for adaptability. The Sumner Redstone Trust, meant to ensure orderly succession, instead became a battlefield. Trustees were ousted, legal thresholds to declare Sumner incapacitated were so high that business decisions were paralyzed, even as he declined physically and mentally. Estate planning blurred with emotional entanglement. Promises to romantic partners, ever-changing wills, and loyalty tests baked into legal documents. There was no clean handoff, just shifting alliances and public drama. Meanwhile, independent board oversight failed to act as a stabilizing force. Directors were too often insiders or loyalists, unable or unwilling to challenge the family, even as governance crumbled. The ultimate lesson? Power without process is brittle. And when control structures are built solely around one person's dominance, they tend to implode when that person inevitably declines. In the Redstone case, the absence of institutionalized succession planning, coupled with unchecked ego and public dysfunction, turned one of America's most successful media dynasties into a cautionary tale for every family business still clinging to control.